Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. For decades, the world has been waiting for their governments to formally broach the subject of UFOs and alien contact. The same governments that have been covering it up and vehemently denying that such things even exist. And now that it's been announced that they do indeed exist and that there have been countless files on it, they are trying to imply that these extraterrestrials are a potential threat. Dr. Stephen Greer, in collaboration with extraterrestrials that he came in contact with several years ago, established a set of guidelines called the CE5 protocols that were created to help humans who wish to, with conscious intent, initiate contact with extraterrestrials. This would serve to circumnavigate any sort of government intervention and interpretation and directly reach out to beings from other extraterrestrial civilizations in order to establish a harmonic connection and reassure them that we have no malice and have a desire to interact peacefully and for mutual benefit. Last April, Dr. Greer released a documentary on Netflix called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which was directed and edited by today's guest, Michael Mazzola. I thought that the film was very informative and enjoyable and would highly recommend it to people who either are interested in initiating contact with aliens or are open-minded enough to be willing to sit through 2 hours of thought-provoking information that would challenge anyone who accepts the mainstream narrative espoused by people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, claiming dismissively that it is highly unlikely that anyone has had alien contact. I start off the conversation by asking Michael if he was interested in these sorts of things before making this documentary.
Actually, no. It's actually quite the opposite. I was very hostile towards the entire subject matter. Most people get involved in this field because, they saw a UFO in the sky, or, they had some kind of mystical experience, out-of-body experience, near-death experience, something like that, contactee experience. But I thought all of that was ridiculous. I was a die-hard atheist skeptic, and I loved debunking this stuff. I love debunking psychic phenomenon, science of consciousness, God, the afterlife, religion, aliens, conspiracies. I thought it was just the stupidest stuff ever, and I thought it was, like a mind virus, And I was promoting reason and rationality and skepticism, and I would have other skeptical atheist friends who would say, "Oh, I wish I could believe, in God, or in aliens, or in, the reality of consciousness, but I just can't believe, I don't see the evidence." And I would say to them, why? Why would you want to believe this stuff? Why would you want it to be true? I'm happy that it's not real.
Sure.
I was very comfortable with my materialist, reductionist view of reality, where we live in a cold, impersonal, random universe. I'm a victim of circumstance. I found that very comforting because I'm weird. I was very happy with that. And then I started looking at arguments against my position, not out of curiosity, but because I wanted to be the best. I wanted to be able to defeat any argument that came my way. And the moment I looked at arguments against my position, I realized that, my position collapsed, and I realized that the extraordinary evidence. The skeptics always say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
the
yeah.
extraordinary evidence was there. And all of these skeptics I had aligned myself with, I realized they weren't skeptics at all. They were just cynical debunkers. And that's like the most charitable interpretation of what they were doing. A lot of them were being just outright deceptive. And so I reluctantly accepted that I was wrong about all this. And then I had to ask myself, well, why is it that I didn't just not believe it, but I opposed it being true? I didn't want it to be real. And the best answer I could come up with was that if this stuff is real, you have to take responsibility for it. If there really are aliens, and there's a cover up, you have to take responsibility for that information. You've got to talk about it. You've got to stick your neck out. If the science of consciousness is real, you have to take responsibility for your own thoughts. You have to take responsibility for your own happiness. You have to take responsibility for creating your own reality. And that's a lot to ask of somebody. And I think that we in this community really underestimate how intimidating that is. I think we make this assumption that everyone wants this stuff to be real. They just need to be persuaded with the data, with the evidence. And I keep saying, if this was about data and evidence, the debate would have been over a long time ago.
Exactly.
This is really about fear of having to take responsibility for this information. That's just my perspective.
Absolutely. Well, what area or what field of study were you did you go into where you found the evidence that turned you to the other side? Was it UFOs?
So, it was UFOs, and it was psychic phenomena kind of simultaneously, because encountering Dr. Greer's stuff on YouTube, he was making the case that you can't really understand ETs unless you understand consciousness. And I appreciated the logic of his argument, even though I assumed it was going to be false, right? So I started investigating both sort of simultaneously, and the evidence was so overwhelming. And on the consciousness side, it was reading Dean Radin's books, Conscious Universe and Entangled Minds, and then reading the arguments against his arguments, and then reading the arguments debunking those arguments. And finally, I just said, okay, this stuff is so real, it's not even funny. And the people who are opposing this are doing it for ideological reasons. It has absolutely nothing to do with the scientific data.
Absolutely. Well, I applaud you for allowing yourself to be flipped. Not many can do that.
I'll take the compliment, because I was really surprised how many people aren't willing to just go where the evidence takes them.
For sure.
There are these massive psychological barriers. And again, it's not about the evidence, it's about fear.
Well, yeah. And sometimes it's about being on a side too. Like once people put themselves under an umbrella, they're very hesitant to switch umbrellas.
Especially if it's your career, right? I mean, no one wants to accept that, their 30 years of scientific publication and books and everything else that they've done is just a bunch of bullshit.
Yes, exactly.
And it's fundamentally wrong, and their entire career has been a lie. And it's not their fault, but it becomes their fault when they refuse to allow themselves to go where the truth is. Science is a methodology. It's a willingly accepted set of limitations for investigating certain aspect of reality. It's not a metaphysics, but it has absolutely become a metaphysics, and our civilization is suffering greatly as a result.
For sure. And then you have that turning into an even more rigidified view of scientism. When people,
exactly.
Yeah. When people just sort of parrot bad science, as if they were in the lab doing the experiences themselves or experiments themselves, and getting all puffy chested about it, just like fundamentalist Christians.
Absolutely. I mean, the scientific establishment of today is absolutely the equivalent of the Vatican high priests of the Middle Ages.
For sure.
It is that level of dogmatic thinking, and it's really embarrassing. So we are, it's really difficult to argue with these people if you think that it's just about the evidence and the data. I keep telling people it's not that. We have to be an example to our fellow humans that you can embrace this new paradigm without becoming a crazy person.
Yes.
Without losing your mind, without being miserable, and without it completely consuming you, because no one wants to become that person.
Absolutely. So it was some of Dr. Greer's stuff that actually helped you to change your mind.
Yeah, it was looking at the original Disclosure Project archives that are all on YouTube. There's 90 hours of stuff. It's absolutely crazy. And these are people who we trusted to run our nuclear facilities. They weren't crazy when we put them in charge of our nukes or the FAA or whatever it is. But the moment they start talking about this stuff, then we just dismiss them. The arguments that people come up with to try to dismiss these people are pretty weak and pretty funny. Saying that some of these military guys are trying to carve out a little bit of fame and money for themselves by doing this. I mean, these guys have had their lives ruined
because
no one. Yeah,
it's so glamorous to claim to have seen a UFO.
Oh, it's so glamorous, yeah. And then to lose your pension, to be unemployable, to be ridiculed, and then that's just what's happening from your fellow Americans. Forget, not to mention all of the abuse and harassment that comes from the men in black suits, who want to shut you up. So, these people have miserable lives, and they're doing it for the right reasons. A couple of them even tried to back out of doing it. It's okay, I take it back. This is they're doing, at the time, like the least popular thing that you can be doing. So the incentives are not aligned for them to be lying about their experience. And there's too many of them giving too many similar stories for it to be an hallucination or, for them to just be crazy. So it's pretty, plus, add in all the documents. I have conversations all the time with stubborn people that kind of go like this. They'll be just refusing to budge on their position, and I'll say, okay, what would convince you? What's the criteria? Hypothetically, what if we had former heads of state, CIA guys, astronauts who walked on the moon, all come out and admit that it was real, and and then the CIA published 8 million pages of documents on their website admitting to the whole thing. Would that persuade you? And invariably they say, yes, then that would persuade me. I say, okay, well, all of that has happened. And then I started talking about, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man who walked on the moon. I say, look, you go to this website, on the CIA's website. And then they say, no, that's all BS. That won't convince me. So it's not about the evidence.
And it's not about, I mean, they may come off like they would be convinced, but it's not really about that at all. Nothing would convince these people short of an experience themselves.
Exactly. And that's the most important takeaway from this movie that we just did. There's a guy named Werner Erhard who started EST in the 70s, which is kind of an eccentric personal development seminar. It was kind of legendary, but he had this line, which was, understanding is the booby prize. Experience is the real prize. So, in this film, we try to give you sort of a scientific, philosophical, and historical framework to kind of understand this contact experience. But you can understand this conceptually, but if you don't participate in the experience, this information is completely worthless to you. And so that is why we're just, really urging people, don't take our word for it. Give it a shot. You've got to participate in this. And you can't participate in this, and you can't make sense of the ET phenomenon in our old materialist paradigm. A lot of people got so irritated that, halfway through this movie, we veer into the consciousness stuff and, the physics stuff. And it's like, oh, you completely go off on this, other direction. But the truth is, we will never make sense of the ET phenomenon in our materialist paradigm. If you try to crowbar aliens into our current paradigm, you're going to end up with a really perverted view of things, and ultimately interpret this as a hostile force, which is what we're seeing unfold in the mainstream media right now. Exactly as Dr. Greer predicted. Love him or hate him, he's been calling it for decades now, and we keep seeing exactly what he's predicted. And he said 20 years ago, they're going to deny this as long as they can, and then when they finally admit it, it's going to be spun as a threat, and that's what we're seeing with the TTSA stuff.
For sure. And I thought all the consciousness and all of that, all of the parts of the film tied in seamlessly. I don't understand why anybody would have a problem with that part, because it's so integral to bringing these experiences in your own life.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, look, not everyone's ready for this stuff. And honestly, when I met Dr. Greer back in December of 2015, we were discussing sort of his vision for Unacknowledged. Unacknowledged was meant to be this sort of, nuts and bolts, let's just hit people over the head with a devastating claim, a devastating document, a devastating interview, devastating fact every minute. And we kind of did that, and it was clear that Unacknowledged was the right movie for that moment in time. But the film that Greer always wanted to do and has dreamt of doing for 30 years was Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. But he understood that we had to do Unacknowledged first, as sort of a stepping stone. I call it disclosure potty training. That's what Unacknowledged was, and people were reaching out to me saying, oh my God, it's the most mind-blowing stuff. And I'm like, oh, no. This is just the potty training to get you ready for the next one. So, I really expected with, first of all, I didn't anticipate the kind of response that we had with Unacknowledged. I mean, it's been viewed hundreds of millions of times at this point.
That's fantastic.
I mean, I literally thought we were going to put this thing on Vimeo, and I would freak out if it got 500,000 views. I would freak out. And then it just totally, we got a distributor behind it. It took off. I couldn't believe it.
That's amazing.
But with Close Encounters, I did not think we were going to see the same thing. I thought this stuff is too crazy. So few people are ready to hear this stuff. And, it's going to, the people who are ready for it are going to find it. But I really thought it would just be speaking to the choir. And that's not what happened at all. I mean, this thing is really having an impact, and I'm so pleased that I was wrong and that so many people are ready to have this conversation.
Yeah, that's really encouraging for sure. I didn't think it was crazier at all. I thought it made total sense, and it brought so many different elements into it, political, spiritual. People are fascinated with wanting to invite an experience like that into their lives, but doing it in a very responsible and sort of a spiritually grounded way. I just thought it was really incredible. I showed it to my kids. I watched it once. My girlfriend and I watched it. And then I had my 11 and 13-year-olds watch it. And we have done the protocols all together, and it's been incredible. I highly recommend it to anybody out there who's listening to this.
Oh, that makes me so happy. And
Oh
again,
yeah,
you can understand this stuff perfectly, but if you don't participate in the experience, it's really worthless information. And
for sure.
it's frustrating to see. I spend way too much time on UFO Twitter, right? And there's just this desperation, especially with the recent Pentagon quote unquote disclosures, right? There's this desperation that, oh, if we could just get the government to release this and that, and everyone's looking for a solution outside of themselves. And if you really understand what we're talking about with the science of consciousness stuff, we're not saying that your consciousness has an influence on reality. We're not saying that, approaching this problem through consciousness is the best way to do it because it's the only thing available to you since we're so otherwise powerless. We're saying that it is literally the only way that we're going to see true disclosure happen and a true transformation. Dr. Greer has this great line that I love. He's got a bunch of them. One of them is, a civilization's technology matches their level of consciousness. I don't believe that we can see the kind of open disclosure that everyone wants until we have the shift in consciousness. It is a prerequisite. We really need to, the human family really needs to internalize this idea that we really do create our own reality. We are
Absolutely.
really co-creating every moment. And that means taking responsibility
Yes.
for the bad things too. Can I go on a tangent for a second?
Please, I invite you.
Okay, so there's this I think he's retired now, but there's this Hawaiian doctor. I can't pronounce his first name, but his name is Dr. Hulen. Have you heard of this guy?
It's not ringing a bell yet.
Okay, so I'm such a big fan of this guy, and so the legend goes that there was this psychiatric hospital for the criminally insane in Hawaii. And it was, these is where they would put the Hannibal Lecters of the world, rapists and murderers. And it was so bad, they had a hard time keeping doctors on staff. And so Dr. Hulen was offered the job, and he said, well, my methods are unorthodox. And they said, look, we don't care. We have to have a doctor on staff. You can do whatever you want. And he ended up curing every single person in this mental facility.
Wow.
And to the point where some of them even walked into court and took full responsibility for what they had done. These are people who were raving lunatics who had to be strapped and drugged all day. And he did it. He cured them without ever interacting with the patients and without prescribing any treatment to them. So how did he do it? He would sit in his office and he would review their case files. And he would take 100% responsibility for what was wrong with them. Because if we create our own reality, that means that some part of him had helped create these crazy motherfuckers, right? So he would sit in his office, he would review their files, he would feel, he would identify whatever it was within himself that he was feeling. The feelings of disgust and anger and pain as he reviewed their cases. And he would, he called it cleaning on it. He would do this ancient Hawaiian sort of self-forgiveness and self-love practice called Ho'oponopono. But basically it was a prayer. It was like a meditation and a mantra that he would do. And all of these people got better. I think they closed the facility. So that is such an amazing, radical example of taking 100% responsibility. And so everyone right now, I live right in the middle. We were talking before we started this interview. I'm living right in the middle of the riots in LA tonight. And I don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of hours, but everyone is so desperately looking outside of themselves for a solution. And we are urging people that the most powerful thing that you can do to change the world around you, whether you want to end racism or end UFO secrecy or whatever it is to work on yourself and to raise your own consciousness, because that will transform everything and everyone around you. But
Absolutely.
no one wants to hear that. But it's the truth, man.
And it takes work, and it does take responsibility. If you can't own your good and your bad stuff, well, that means you've still got some homework to do. And that's what I love about the approach of this. And we should recount the different types of close encounters. But I like the anarchic nature of this direct, inciting direct contact yourself, and not having to go through these power structures and bullshit governments and military organizations, and you just get directly to the experience yourself. And I really think that that's one of the most valuable things about this whole practice, the protocols. So what are the different kinds of close encounters, real quick?
Absolutely. So close encounters of the first kind is if you see a UFO in the sky. The second kind would be if there's some kind of physical trace left behind. Crop circle is a great example. Impressions in the ground, stuff like that. Close encounters of the third kind is when you see the occupant of a UFO. So you see an extraterrestrial being. Close encounters of the fourth kind is if you're taken on board an ET craft, and that's not just a terrifying abduction experience. And I hope we get to kind of unpack that a little bit too, because that's way more complicated than people think. And close encounters of the fifth kind is human initiated contact. And this is the experience that we are inviting everybody to participate in. You don't have to be a yoga master. You don't have to be a lifelong contactee. You don't have to be Dr. Stephen Greer. You can just be average Joe Blow off the street trying it for your first time, and you can have the most transcendent, incredible experiences. And people aren't just seeing fleets of craft surround them when they participate in this. They're having, in many cases, face-to-face contact with flesh and blood ETs, or sometimes they will partially materialize as sort of an etheric being. They often get mistaken for angels, but they're not. And we can unpack all of that. But it sounds pretty wild. But when you sort of understand this new paradigm that ETs and ET civilizations are operating in, this stuff actually makes a lot of sense. And I'm happy to try to unpack that.
Sure. And in some cases too, with these encounters, healing takes place, physical healing, right? There's a guy in the movie whose hearing or lack of hearing got healed.
Correct. Yes, Ed Moen. It's a beautiful, moving story in the film. But there's so many others. I have so many friends who have been healed during these contact experiences. But let me approach it this way. Have you ever read the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda?
I have not. I've been surrounded by people who have my whole life, but I've never read it myself.
Well, I didn't read it until a few years ago because it sounded, just the title sounds kind of boring. I don't want to read the life story of some yogi I never heard of, but it's actually one of the most beautiful and fascinating books you could ever read. I think Steve Jobs, it was the only book he kept on his iPad. He read it every year, and he gifted it to everybody at his funeral. But it's a really spectacular book, and it's it recounts Yogananda's experience growing up in India and learning it, from all of these Kriya yoga masters, and the kinds of supernatural abilities that they would exhibit and that others would exhibit as they attain these higher and higher states of consciousness. So these are called the siddhis, Siddhis. This comes from the ancient Vedic literature. It's not just in Yogananda's Kriya tradition. These are all these different yogic and meditation traditions. Transcendental meditation talks about this. That's where Greer got his start as a TM teacher. So what are these cities? What are these abilities that supposedly manifest, right? Well, telepathy, teleportation, dematerialization, levitation, bilocation. Gee, these sound an awful lot like the kind of phenomenon that these UFOs are exhibiting, right? People experience feeling the sort of unconditional love and telepathic communication from these craft. They levitate, they teleport, they dematerialize, they rematerialize, they can bilocate. So what's going on here? Well, if you're talking about an ET civilization that has, hundreds of thousands or millions or a billion, whatever it is, years, a further spiritual advancement relative to us, they're operating on this on a level of consciousness where these abilities are a part of everyday life, and they are fully expressed, and they will then begin to manifest technologically. So when you talk to these military guys who've gone out on these crash retrieval teams and picked up, downed UFOs, brought them back to these secret labs and studied them, you look at the metal under a microscope. And this metal is so pure that we could not replicate it even in a vacuum in space. And that's because these UFOs are not being manufactured on like a Ford assembly line factory on another planet, the way we would manufacture a car or an airplane. They're literally being manifested, for lack of human vocabulary for this stuff. They're literally being manifested out of the fabric of space-time, through this sort of consciousness technology interface. There are craft that we have built and sort of back engineered UFOs, and the way you tell the difference is that the human built ones will have rivets and seams, because we build them the way we build stuff. But true ET craft won't have any rivets or seams. It'll all be one piece. Think of it as sort of like a trans-dimensional 3D printer that's just manifesting things, and through consciousness that's integrated with their technology. I know I'm not explaining it very well, but I don't have human vocabulary, to sort of describe this stuff. Dr. Greer is way better at explaining this stuff than I am. So when you understand that a UFO is literally a projection of the consciousness of its inhabitants, and that ET civilizations are operating on technological systems that are fully integrated with their consciousness, then it makes sense that the way we would try to initiate contact with them is through consciousness, through coherent thought. And Greer will use this analogy of a laser being coherent light. Well, we in CE5 we're using coherent thought. And all CE5 is, in my opinion, at its essence, people say, well, it's a meditation technique, it's remote viewing, it's this and that. It's not really what it is. At its essence, it is sending an intention that is coherent enough that it can be picked up by these ET civilizations and responded to. Now, most of us have rats in our brain, and me included, and we can't send an intention, that is so clear that whatever we want, whether it's ET contact or $1 million or world peace or whatever, can be instantly manifested. So we have to use techniques like meditation to sort of calm our minds, and get us into that frame of mind where we can send a coherent intention. And what we find is that these ET civilizations will pick up on it if we're sending it at the right frequency, which is not, hey, come perform for us like circus animals. And certainly not if you're terrified of them, they're not going to show up.
Yeah.
But if it's really sent through love and an open, sincere desire to make contact as an ambassador to say, hey, not everyone on Earth is a complete asshole. You know, we'd love to interact with you. They will answer the call. And there are hundreds of thousands of people doing this every day around the world. And I'll just say one more thing. People start doing CE5 because they want to see an alien, right? Because what could be cooler than that? But it becomes part of their lives, and they do it for 20, 30 years because of the transcendent states of consciousness that they experience while doing this. That's actually just as, if not more, transformational and impactful than just making that direct contact. You know, it's all part of the package, you know, and that is the shift that we are going to have to make if we want to have disclosure, if we want to have, you know, how could we possibly, you know, forget ET contact, how could we possibly just roll out the technologies, you know, that we've been sitting on for, you know, half a century, or in some cases a century, you know, endless production of free, clean energy through 0-point energy technologies, you know, trans-dimensional 3D printing, for lack of a better term, you know, all of these other things that we've back-engineered that could have everyone on this planet living like an immortal billionaire and completely heal our ecosystem. How can we roll that out at the level of consciousness that we're at now? You know, it's all just going to be weaponized, you know, and that's actually, you know, let's go into that point just for a second. You know, that's how, you know, these ET civilizations don't pose an existential threat to us, because, you know, the technology that it takes to travel interdimensionally, which they have to in order to get here, they're not traveling at the speed of light, you know, the kinds of technologies that they're exhibiting, if they had this technology at the level of consciousness that we're operating on, they would have destroyed us, they would have destroyed each other, they would have destroyed themselves a long time ago. So there is a, I'm not, you know, look, Greer gets so much shit for this. People say, oh, you're saying that all the ETs are good, and, you know, that's crazy. It's like, look, there's good and bad in everything. He'll be the first to say that. But there has to be a baseline of civility and civilizational sort of, you know, sort of peace. There has to be a baseline of higher consciousness for you to become an interstellar civilization in the first place, without blowing yourself up, or frankly, without being put in quarantine. And it is our understanding at the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and through our whistleblowers, the people we've spoken to, and also through our contact experiences, that we are under quarantine. We're allowed to go into low Earth orbit, but we're not allowed to go much further than that until we get our shit together as a planet. And I'll shut up now. I'm sorry I've been rambling.
The listeners are here for you, my friend. They're not here for me. They hear me every show. So your job is to talk in this equation. I mean that peacefully. But let's go back to the film a little bit.
Sure.
That's a great basis for what CE5 is, and what the premise of a lot of this film talks about. And I do like it because it does, the whole exercise shows us not only how humans are interconnected, but how cosmically everything is interconnected. And I heard you mention in another interview, The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot.
Yes.
Excellent book.
Excellent book. And I heard from someone who's a close personal friend of his, who's on my team, that I don't know if this was publicly known. I don't think it was, but your listeners can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure he did not discuss this publicly, but Michael Talbot was actually a lifelong contactee, like so many others are. You know, there are the lucky few among us, and I've got several friends, not just Dr. Greer, but many others, who've been having lifelong contact since they were little kids. They don't have to sit down and do CE5, right? And Michael Talbot was one of them. And he was shown this holographic model of the universe during a really deep transcendent contact experience. And so he set about to sort of back engineer the scientific case for that. So he wasn't following the evidence and then arrived at this idea of a holographic universe. He was shown that that's what it is, and then he went and tried to put the case together for it with existing scientific theories and evidence that was out there. And I think that book has really held up very well. I highly recommend it to everybody.
Me too. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. I wish he was still with us to have conversations with about this stuff.
Likewise.
Yes. Okay. To the film. I also am a filmmaker, so I know that much more footage and supplemental features are gathered than one can actually use in the final cut. And did you find that a lot of the stuff that was on the cutting room floor was there for time constraints, or because of the sort of the volatility of the information?
Oh, well, it was definitely for time constraints. I
Okay.
mean, there were literally, I'm not exaggerating, thousands of hours of just CE5 expedition footage already existent in Dr. Greer's archives.
Wow.
And it was actually a very short production timeline. We had a team of people just going through this stuff and pulling clips, and then we were sourcing stuff from around the world. People on these CE5 teams sending stuff in that wasn't part of the existing archives, and then having to track down the provenance of every shot. It's like, okay, who shot this? Do we know this person? Do we trust this person? Were there other witnesses there? We don't want to put stuff in that's fake, because that's such a problem with all the stuff on YouTube now, is that 80% of it is CGI, and so it just makes us look so stupid. And sometimes we'll mistake something for being real. I think people pointed out there were one or two things in Unacknowledged that were fake, but we really did our best to vet this stuff and to source stuff from people who we trusted. So we didn't want to repeat that mistake with CE5, and so everything was thoroughly vetted. But then, just in terms of there were so, we only show snippets of the CE5 experiencers talking about their experiences. We could have done a series of films with just them describing their experiences out in the field. But, ultimately we made the call that, there's only so much of somebody else's experience that you can listen to. And we made the call to really just sort of emphasize the big picture view of the phenomenon, giving people sort of the scientific and philosophical framework, and then giving them the nudge to go and have their own experiences, rather than sitting through 2 hours of other people talking about what they went through. So it was kind of tricky to find that balance. And, I go back and I just can't believe how much information we crammed into this thing. I mean, by the end of the first act, I was like, oh my God, like that could just be a movie, I also want to just let your listeners know that we blow through this stuff so quickly, especially the claims that we're making in the first act, because I thought it was really important that we kind of recap the stuff that happened in Unacknowledged, and also the stuff that's happened since then with TTSA. And we would need a series of films to show you all the documents and all the evidence that we have to back up the claims that we're making. So this film's not meant to convince you that we are right about psyops and psychological warfare and TTSA and all this stuff. This is more of a video essay stating our position, but then it's up to everyone to go to the bibliography and dig into the sources that we're citing. Go to Grier's website, look at the documents, go to the Disclosure Project YouTube page and look at what these people are saying. Dive into, Grier has an amazing lecture. I think it's the best thing he ever did, from November 2015. It's called an expose of the national security state. It's like 4 hours long. It's like 3.5 hours long on YouTube, and that was the inspiration for Unacknowledged. And he analyzes in depth every document that we reference, and and that's what you got to do. Don't don't just dismiss it, but also don't take our word for it. Go and look at the sources that we're citing.
I like it. I like it. And I heard you talk about before, maybe it was before Unacknowledged, but at least before Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, going down into Dr. Grier's basement at this sort of massive archive of different kinds of documentation.
Oh yes, yeah. He has a beautiful home in Virginia, and with a massive basement, and it was just filled with probably 60, 70 boxes.
Wow.
And of just thousands of documents. And, and I had to go through as much as I could. We spent about 3 weeks going through as much as we could. That's about the time that we had before we had to film, for Unacknowledged, and just picking out the best stuff. And I found some gems in there.
I'm sure.
One thing I was actually really excited about was, one of the things that Greer's gotten a lot of shit for is talking about having briefed the CIA director under Clinton, R. James Woolsey. And Woolsey and the other people at that briefing put out an open letter saying, "This briefing never happened. I met you at a dinner party and I was trying to be polite. Stop mischaracterizing it." And this has been just used so effectively to discredit Greer. So I actually found, buried in one of these boxes, I found the original correspondence setting up that briefing. And we showed a snippet of it in Unacknowledged. But again, we only had time for snippets,
Sure.
but it totally vindicates Greer's side of the story. And I said, why have you never published this? And so we put it in the film. And
Fantastic.
Yeah.
How long did it take to make the whole movie?
Close Encounters or Unacknowledged?
Mm-hmm. Close Encounters.
It took about 7 months.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 7 months.
Incredible.
But post-production, we didn't have nearly the time that we needed to. And so it was very rushed. But I'm happy with how it came out.
Yeah. So much great footage in there too. I love how you kept the original audio for a lot of the sighting footage, because that helped to prove to me, not that it needed to be proved for me by any means, but its authenticity. You hear people cussing and, they sound exactly like I would sound if I were shooting footage of the same thing, like, holy shit, did you see that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What the fuck is that? Yeah, exactly. That's what's fun is hearing that sort of very visceral, authentic response.
Yes, for sure. Is there any plans to release it as a Blu-ray with like shitloads of extras?
Probably not. We just put out a DVD, and I think that's where it's going to stop. I don't know for sure. It's not up to me. It's up to Dr. Greer and the people who run that stuff. I think that most people are viewing content digitally. It actually was very difficult to put the DVD together that was just released. It was like surprisingly a giant pain in the ass because it's kind of considered obsolete technology. So like
sure.
none of my computers have DVD ports anymore, and so I think there's this big. Well, there's definitely this big encouragement to push everyone to viewing stuff digitally, and they're probably not going to do a Blu-ray, but I don't know if there's enough demand for it. I know that he has a big fan base that was waiting for the DVD, and now they can order that. But I would be surprised if they did a Blu-ray.
Oh, that's too bad because I mean, I would get a 4K version myself because it's beautiful. It's really, I mean, not only is the content so dense and fascinating and compelling, but it's really beautifully shot and it really looks fantastic. I watched it on my huge TV and I downloaded it too, so it was nice and crisp and it looked fucking amazing.
Oh, that makes me really happy.
Yes,
That's something that I really, I really was concerned about. And me as a filmmaker, uh, it's never going to be good enough.
of course.
So, I watch it, and all I see are mistakes and
Yeah,
problems and whatever.
sure.
But it's getting a very good response, and people say it's visually better than Unacknowledged, and I agree. Unacknowledged had to rely heavily on a lot of the Disclosure Project archive footage, which is like the gold standard of it's like the most explosive interview footage ever. But it was shot in 1999. It's not very pretty, and so for this, I just wanted to make it as pretty as possible. So I'm
Oh yeah.
glad you liked it.
Oh yeah, very aesthetically pleasing. And let's go back to your personal experience. Have you yourself? I'm assuming that you've done the protocols. Have you had any CE5 experiences yourself?
Yes, and actually the best one was actually with Jim Martin, who's the producer of the film, and he's in the film as well. He shot actually some of the best, probably the best footage that's in the movie. He shot it just doing CE5 in his backyard in Long Beach, and he has a brief segment in there talking about it. But we went out to MacArthur Park in Los Angeles in the middle of the day, crowded park, sunny out, the group of people, and we're able to do this, and we were just surrounded with these bizarre looking, they looked like trans-dimensional Chinese dragons. It was like
Wow.
shimmering red and shimmering yellow and shimmering green, metallic, like it looked like Mercury in the sky. It was so bizarre. And someone's got it on tape. I don't know where that footage is. I got to track it down. But that was really really cool to see that we could do this, in the middle of the day in a crowded park. You
Sure.
know, I mean, when Greer does these expeditions, they go out into the wilderness in the middle of the night, and that's where you're going to have really the most profound experiences, because that's where it's going to be safest for the ETs. You're also not going to have other people sort of infecting it energetically. So I was surprised that we were able to have such amazing contact in the middle of the day in a crowded park. It was really cool.
Yeah, that's the bad thing about where I live. I live in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. So looking out into the sky in my backyard, it's either surrounded by high trees or telephone lines. So there's like just like a little funnel that you're looking out of. But the first time that me and my family did it, uh, since it was populated, I wasn't sure. We were in a populated area. I'm not sure. I wasn't sure how effective that would be. And we saw something that looked like a craft, but it was teeny tiny and very, very high up. But the fact of this, how fast it was moving, made me think that it was definitely not a plane and not a satellite. But I was thinking, I wonder if that would be more effective if we were somewhere out in the middle of no place.
Well, you know what? It's Don't let that be a hang up, because you're just going to manifest a lack of activity. Um, Again, go back if you don't want to find it in the. I think it's like at the end of the second act or something like that in the movie. But if you just go on YouTube, we released a clip. Just type in Jim Martin CE5. It should come up. A little excerpt from the film. This was just shot in his backyard in Long Beach, in the middle of a very dense suburban neighborhood. And it's the best footage in the film. Like I think it's just absolutely incredible. So you don't need to be out in the wilderness to be effective with this.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Let's see. I had another question, spontaneous question on the tip of my tongue, and it disappeared. So I will jump to the last question on my list, which is where can people watch, rent, or buy this film?
So right now it's available on all the major TVOD platforms. So you can get it on iTunes, Vimeo, um, Amazon, PlayStation, Google Play, whatever the Microsoft one is, and Voodoo, maybe a few others. I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
But if you want the bonus features, there's an extended interview with Greer. It's like 3.5 hours.
Ooh.
And there's also, it's totally worth it, is the extended interview with Danny Sheehan. I mean, we could have done a whole movie with just Danny Sheehan talking about this stuff. I think those bonus features are only on Vimeo and iTunes.
Okay.
So that's where you go for those. And again, just for Danny alone, it's totally worth it. And I think there's also a bonus feature. Actually, I don't think, I know, because I had to put it together. There's a bonus feature with all the UFO footage, like in a 25-minute sort of compilation. So you have it all in one spot.
Very cool. And that's bundled with the other special features too?
Yeah, that's bundled. So
cool.
If you're going to buy it, I would do it on iTunes or Vimeo, so you get all the special features.
Cool. I rented it. Well, that's how I saw it before, but I will definitely buy it to get those for sure. Well, I'll have the links to all that stuff in the episode notes. One last thing, where can people follow you, and is there any next project in the works?
Yeah, so I've got a few things in the works. Unfortunately, I don't have authorization to announce them yet, but I've got some very cool things cooking.
Nice.
And all related to this subject matter or other explosive cover-ups. You can find me on Twitter. My handle is Thus Tweeted Mike. I don't know why it's that, but that's what it is. And I don't have many followers, so please follow me.
Cool.
And I really appreciate everyone supporting this film. And we've got more stuff coming out soon. I just can't talk about it yet.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Michael, so much for agreeing to have this conversation. And by the sounds of what you have coming down the road, we will probably be talking again.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Cool. Yes. And I stay safe tonight. I hope nothing bad goes down.
You know, it probably won't. I'm sitting outside right now, and I don't even hear a siren. So,
cool.
But we'll see what happens.
Yes. Fingers crossed. Well, have a good evening, Michael.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, I'll talk to you sometime down the road.
All right. Bye-bye.
Well, that was a very enjoyable conversation for me on a couple of very important levels. One of them, of course, is the content itself, which I found fascinating, and it's something that I've been interested in for quite a while now. But it takes it to another level with the CE5 protocols. I'm all for anarchic assemblies of people trying to contact aliens and extraterrestrials on their own, completely going over the heads of any sort of power structure or military industrial complex that would like to get in between those two parties. So I'm down for that for sure. And also, as a fellow filmmaker myself, I was interested in finding out more about the process of making this particular film because I thought it was excellent. Not only was it entertaining, but it was highly informative. They pack a lot in 2 hours, but it doesn't feel like 2 hours. It goes by very, very quickly. At least I thought so. Anyway, the links to watch that or research any of this stuff further will be in the episode notes. If you liked this episode and hopefully got something from it, and maybe you've listened to other Melt episodes and you also took away something from it that helped you out or gave you something to think about or maybe even widened your awareness a little bit, it would be great if you would contribute and help this whole effort out. Basically, it's just me, of course, and the people that I talk to, and this stuff comes out of my pocket. And granted, the monthly bills at the moment aren't all that high. It still would make a big difference, not only if I were able to take care of those, but also to upgrade, expand, and put these things out more frequently. I would love for this to be my job. Absolutely. It wouldn't be a job. It's something that I'm passionate about anyway. But I would love to be able to devote more time into doing this and making it better. So any little bit would help. And of course, the most tangible way that you can do that is financially. And you can go to www.patreon.com/themeltpodcast. And there you will find many ways to contribute financially. You can sign up for as low as $1 per month, up to anything that you think that this podcast and the effort put into it is worth. So that's at Patreon. And another way that you can contribute to that is non-financial is just spreading the word, simply spreading the word. Maybe telling your friends or family who you think would be into this stuff or might benefit from it, just passing the links on to them, posting it on your timeline, whatever and however you see fit. That helps incredibly too. Also, wherever you find this podcast or subscribe to it via iTunes or Google Play, Spotify, whatever, you can leave good reviews, hopefully. I mean, I want it to be honest. If you think it sucks, then feel free to say so. Or rate it with stars. Lots of stars, preferably. So those things help a lot too. And just sending good vibes. Maybe, sending a message saying that you really liked an episode or suggestions for guests. And also, I collect stories from listeners, too, who have had firsthand experiences with the kinds of stuff that we talk about here. So you can send those to themeltpodcast@gmail.com. I don't know why I cannot talk right now. Anyway, thank you all so very much for listening. You're very much appreciated. And I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I hope you got something out of it. And I have lots of great stuff coming out in the next month or two that I think you also will really enjoy. And by all means, go and see the documentary. It's on Netflix. So if you already have a subscription to that, then all you got to do is do a search. All right. Until 2 weeks from now, take care of yourselves, and I will see you then.